Homer Simpson were in that band. That Simpson movie. I'll cover the last guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So where's our last
Yeah, I did. Okay. This is going to be, it's interesting to see sort of our age demographic in this group, because talking about what happened in 2003, for some people is sort of like, yeah, I was in grade school back in 2003. Maybe a couple people, no, I think everyone was alive in 2003. Some of us were in our 40s in 2003, but that's another conversation. But I'm going to do a little presentation about a paper that I've written, and I just need to give you a little background. I knew we had problems in our movement in 2003. I have a personal story with that. Part of it was that I was in Los Angeles, and in 2001 was part of the conversation that had Kip McKean, who was our leader, step down from being the leader of our movement. That's a whole other story. But we obviously had some issues, some challenges going on in our leadership. And then I want to say this in all honesty, I was surprised by how bad things got in 2003 in many places. I was surprised by it. I didn't see that coming. And you know, when you don't see something coming, then you got to ask yourself, why did I not see that? Why didn't I have a clue? You know, we were about to go through a real tribulation as a group. And because I didn't have a clue, I also didn't realize sort of what the roots of the problem were per se, or what was really going on. And so the first book I read was a book by a guy named Susan, and it was called Firestorm. And it was about a guy who all he does is full-time church conflict resolution. I mean, what a terrible job. I mean, that's all he does. On the other hand, what a great job, because it's a real thing. It's just being honest. Like, he's really helping people. But I'm reading through this guy's book, and this is like 2004, and I'm thinking, why have I never even heard of this book? Well, part of it is because well, that's never going to happen to us. And that's always a mistake when you think something can't happen to you. That's like saying, I want to live anywhere but Alaska. Some sister was telling me that she'd had that thought 20 years ago before she moved here and has never left again. You know, it's hard, when you say a but, you be ready, because that's usually when something starts to happen. But anyways, I started going back for some education, and I started studying, I went for a master's degree in Christian ministry. I got halfway through that and got accepted. I moved to the UK to work with a church in Birmingham, England. And I had the opportunity to be part of a doctorate program there in practical theology. And to be honest, that's sort of, when it comes to the academic side of it, this is my sort of, my love academically. Practical theology asks a question. How does how I practice my faith come back and affect my faith? In other words, there's a cycle of faith and practice.
Yep.
And you know, one of the most blatant examples of this in church history is infant baptism. The doctrine of infant baptism was formulated after infant baptism became a practice. It wasn't a formulated doctrine. It's not a New Testament doctrine. But for various reasons, one is a weakening biblical teaching. Two is a tendency to want to establish churches that were part of the state, part of the community, to be Roman, meant to be Christian. You know, these kind of forces to make Christianity cultural. Infant baptism became more popular, and also children died at a young age, and people believed that baptism was a moment of salvation. Therefore, we need to baptize, and that just got younger and younger and younger for various reasons. And so, but eventually, then in the 4th century, guys like Augustine wrote a lot of already in the 5th century, wrote basically the doctrine. He explained why we should have like infant baptism, original sin. But original sin was not an idea people were tossing around in the 2nd century, because it's not a biblically based idea. I say all that simply, I mean, if you can introduce infant baptism and it become part of standard Christian practice, there's something going on, and we need to pay attention. And what happened for us lost, I believe, is we had very good intentions. But something, we got off track as a movement. And so I've called this study, and just to be honest about how long this study took, I put over 2,000 hours into this study. It was going to be my doctoral thesis. I actually stepped out of the program because I moved away from the UK, and I put the whole thing on the shelf. I put about 700 hours into it, and I took it off the shelf and said, you know what, I need to finish this. I feel like we need to have a conversation that's got some facts in it. Because when you get into just a narrative story, the truth is everyone's got their version. The thing about facts, if my temperature was 92 degrees yesterday, you can't change that. That's like a fact. If I'm 5'11 3/4, that's a fact. Like there's certain physical measurements that don't change.
Yep.
And what that means to my overall health, etc., that's a whole other conversation. But do you understand what I'm saying? Let's get some facts on the table. So this is what exactly it says, a study of the statistical narrative. In other words, kind of looking at the story of the ICOC, but also looking at the statistics and seeing what we can learn from this. And I call this the initial growth phase because I'm looking forward to another incredible growth phase, where we're in a stabilization phase, and even to this day still. We've just stabilized. We're growing roughly 2% around the world per year. Now, some parts of the world are doing amazing things. Some of the local congregations are doing amazing things. I think you've seen some very encouraging growth here in the church in Anchorage. The church in Indonesia, in the last 15 years, have grown from 3,500 to 7,000. I mean, in their total membership. I mean, there's some pretty amazing things going on. A church in London has gone from 700, it's getting close to 1,000 now. There's some really bright spots. But, saying all that, then there's our overall statistics not so good. There's many people are still pretty flat. I think part of this is that we don't really understand our story. And there's some people remembering the glory days. Boy, I remember, I've seen things that would just blow your mind. I've seen 28 people baptized in one day. The most I've seen, the one day personally with my own eyes, was 53 in one single day.
Come on.
Okay. Now, I haven't seen that for a while.
Yeah.
And for that to be done properly, there had to be a lot of groundwork laid. In other words, that just didn't happen by coincidence. Remember, Jesus said to his disciples, you're going to harvest where you did not sow. That came true on the day of Pentecost, when 3,000 people got baptized, because it was the preaching of Jesus they were responding to. Yeah, Peter told them what to do, but it was Jesus who showed them what to do. Now you know what I'm saying? So Jesus had sown the seed for 3 years, and they harvested where they did not sow. Because to be honest, I don't think the disciples were that much help in Jesus' time of ministry. So I say all that simply because you got to be careful how you look at numbers. If the Jerusalem church was always looking back to the day of Pentecost, they never had a day like the day of Pentecost. That was their best day. That's kind of discouraging, right? I mean, who wants to have their best day on the first day? You want to look forward to something, but you have to understand the situation. Jesus had been preaching and teaching, Jesus himself, God in the flesh, for 3.5 years, and that was what the fruit of the day of Pentecost really was about, the seed that he sowed. Peter said in the sermon, you know this Jesus I'm talking about, you saw his miracles, God accredited him to you. You understand? So they reaped where they did not sow, and that was pretty awesome. Most of us don't get to fall into that kind of category. We have to do a bit of sowing before there's reaping.
Right.
But once you start to see the world more spiritually, you realize God is sowing even when we are not. And we've all met people. The one thing I'll say about open people is I cannot see if a person is open by looking at them. Actually, one conversation doesn't fully explain it. But if I get the Bible open with somebody and we start sharing about our lives, the odds of being able to see their level of openness becomes very real. So we got to just approach the scriptures with great care and preach the gospel as much as we can. Now, this is all. Ray can give you the link to this article. It's actually You just write this down, missionstory.com. That is my finished website. I apologize for that. I hate to send you to a website that's been being built for 10 years and still not built. Anyway, I was smart enough to get the web name I wanted back when it was available. So missionstory.com. But on the front page of that is a link to this article where you can read it. And it's a pretty intense statistical study. The article itself is 39 pages long, but the actual statistical evidence backing the article, I think there's a 15-page explanation of how I developed the statistical database, and then the whole database is actually there. So every annual statistic for all of our churches from 1979 until the end of 2002, I think that's another 16 pages of Excel sheets. So all that data is there if you're interested in that kind of thing. Not everybody is, I understand that. But I want us to look at this. This is the graph of the church. And, oops, sorry, going backwards. Okay, so bringing it up into real time. We started with one congregation, and we're 439 congregations by the end of 2002. We started with 30 disciples in Boston, and by the end of 2002, we're 135,000 worldwide. Now, I don't care how you look at that, just that fact alone is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It is encouraging, because that means basically 135,000 people who were not baptized disciples in the beginning were at the end, right?
Yeah.
So when you look at that, you kind of go, wow, that's a lot of people, 135,000. That's like half the population of Anchorage or more, right? Can you imagine if half the population were Christians? I mean, like it's a pretty encouraging statistic, and there's a lot of encouraging stories that happen, but there's also some other tendencies. That itself doesn't tell you everything you might need to see. Here's a picture of the annual growth of the ICOC. And so you can see it started very low, and then it goes in a pretty steady climb through the 90s up until 2002. But it's already plateauing near the end of this, where this graph goes in 2002. And here's, if you look at the accumulated number of baptisms, or I'll call them additions and deletions. So additions to the membership and deletions. Deaths are not considered in the statistical study. The data's there, but they're not in the graphs, because it was less than 1% of our actual membership died in this time. So the truth is, it's not a very significant number. It doesn't really change anything. So I wasn't trying to make that factor. But we have the additions and deletions. Again, the lines seem pretty smooth. But you have to notice something. On the left side is the actual membership of the church. And on the right side is the accumulative number of additions and deletions. So on the left side, we've got it's going up to 160,000 members. But on the right side, it's going up to 500,000. Okay, and you'll see that there's obviously more additions than deletions, and in rough terms, the difference between the additions and deletions, that's the membership. Okay, cumulatively. So there's roughly 135,000 difference between additions and deletions. But if you start looking at it, you realize we have more than 300,000 deletions. Okay, we're ending with 135,000. Now, still, when you look at this, it looks kind of level and looks stable. But the truth is, it wasn't stable. It wasn't stable at all. If you take the same data and look at it annually, in other words, what is the annual number, not a cumulative, building, the membership will be accumulative, but the additions and deletions, we'll just have those by annual statistic. That's what we have. And as you can see then, we're introduced to a very important point, something called a tipping point. In other words, a tipping point, and I just have to give you 1 second. I'm mirroring displays rather than extending my desktop, so I don't have any notes in front of me. Oh, okay, here we go. Very good. Okay, so something that we couldn't see clearly, now we can see clear. There's this tipping point. And Merriam-Webster defines a tipping point as the critical point in a situation, process, or system beyond which a significant and often unstoppable effect or change takes place. It's kind of like falling off a cliff. When you hit a tipping point, you can't stop. And if it's stoppable, then it's not a true tipping point. Okay? And what we're going to see is we hit a definitive tipping point. And in fact, the highest number of additions would be in 1998. So though anyone that was there would say we went into a crisis mode in 2003, the truth is we'd already tipped in 1998. And as you can see, both those additions and deletions are sinking. But here's the sad news. The additions is dropping much faster than the deletions. So they're about to cross in 2003. This graph only goes up to 2002. Because what the purpose of the study was to examine what led up to 2003. Studying 2003 forward is a whole other conversation and another study. But why did we not notice this? Like we went into the year 2000 celebrating the end of what we call the 6-year plan. We planted churches in over 160 countries. We've gone from one country to 160. And in that last 6 years, we did like another 70, 80 countries. Like it's amazing how many places we were going. But we were celebrating something that wasn't really definitively growth. We were celebrating expansion. And expansion in many companies, if it happens too quickly, that's what happens right before bankruptcy. Okay? You can expand too quickly so that you don't have the resources to sustain. And but we weren't thinking about that. Instead, I hate to say it, but this was printed in November 1st, LA Story, year 2000. So what I did in my study is I took bulletin articles, public information, printed by the leadership of the ICOC, and put it into the story. So what were we saying? In the year 2000, just by the end of the year 2000, you see we're already dying. What was said? Well, I'm going to read it. It says, no other religious movement has spread this far, this fast, since the 1st century. Now, I hate to say it, but one is, that's an unprovable tendency. We don't have the data to make that comment. Number two, what do we mean by that? Because in the 1st century, we're not aware that they actually had a measurable plan. They had a qualitative plan, but a quantitative plan? We're not being, the gospel spread fairly naturally. And there was the mission to go out into all the world, but nobody was following a schedule. And we'll talk about that, because that schedule changed how things got done. That wasn't good. So the graph shows us a tipping point that started in 1999, but it also shows two other trends. There's a connection between changes and additions and deletion lines. So when you look at the mirroring of deletions to additions, the red line to the blue line. And secondly, what we'll see is we never got better at keeping people faithful. We always lost a certain amount of people over time as members. And we weren't getting better at that. So that's a failure. We'll talk about that. And the other thing we can see is something catastrophic was about to take place. Remember, this is probably 2003. So if you just take between those dotted lines, just do some very simple mathematical projections, because you can see they're following a pretty clear pattern. This is what you end up having. Okay, we're looking at that. Okay, that's that same section now magnified. So now we're looking at 1998 to 2002. Okay, and if you could just do some very basic mathematical projection, this is what happens. The additions just keep going down and down, and the deletions are going at a lesser rate. And if you just look at that, this prediction. This data predicts minus 9,000 in membership in the year 2003 and minus 20,000 in the year 2004. That's what it predicts. That's pretty much exactly what happened. And then it stabilized. Because, you can't just go to zero unless we all just disappear, right? We're going to keep moving forward. But basically, this is what we see. Okay, in those 3 years, and this is heartbreaking to say, 64,000 people left. Okay? And rightfully, anyone should say that's shocking. That shouldn't be. There are 135,000 members and 64,000 left. Wow. But what happened the 3 years before? Okay? 70,000 had left. See, the 3 years before 2003 were actually worse. But again, if you look at the other 3 years, 89,000 had left. I mean, my point is this. Yeah, 2003 was bad, but it's just when it became unavoidable and it was no longer hidden. It was clear we had a problem. But the problem had already been well established. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so anyone who's going to blame 2003 on some poor guy's letter is missing the point. And even if the letter connected with a number of people, the truth is that's not what provoked the crisis. The crisis was already in full swing. And sadly what happened in response to this letter, as far as most of us know, we didn't hear any voice of these 89,000. We didn't know these people. Maybe we did, but we didn't. They had no collective voice. In the next 3 years, when 76,000 left, again, no collective voice. We didn't hear anything. But when the 64,000 left, the letter gave them a voice. The letter gave them a rallying point. And something now is public. Everyone can read it. Someone could say, yeah, I agree with what got said there on page 14. And the letter was like 52 pages long, the Henry Creed letter. And in 52 pages, if you've got a problem, you'll be able to find something there to sort of resonate. I don't want to make light of it, but we have to understand something. The letter wasn't the problem. I think we make a big mistake as a movement to blame the letter. It's not the letter. It's us. And I've been with the movement since 1983, so I have to take responsibility for this as well. When the crisis happened, over 8% of what was called the ICOC was the churches my wife and I had planted. 8%. I'm not guilty. As Paul said in a famous passage, my conscience is clear, but it doesn't make me innocent. I want you to know something here. There wasn't a bunch of malicious people saying, oh, souls don't matter, people are falling away. It wasn't that kind of, it was the zeal to baptize as many as possible being held up as the ideal. And that's not the full picture of what we should be doing as disciples. That's an initial step, it's a necessary step. So here's another way of just demonstrating this. In the beginning of 1997, we had 86,000 disciples. Okay? So what happened in the ensuing 3 years, we went from 86,000 to 119,000. Okay? I mean, that's 35,000 increase, 34,000. But there was 89,000 that had left. So we increased by 34,000, but 89,000 people had left. Do you understand how significant that is? If you go into the next section, again, we can see in the 6 years prior to 2003, more people had left than that remained beginning 2003. So again, I'm kind of beating this point, but I just want to make sure we understand it. It isn't about a letter. A letter didn't provoke a crisis. It was how we were building. And so we need to go back and understand, why did we tip? Why was there a tipping point? Well, what can we learn from this statistical narrative so that we don't make this mistake again? At the same time, we need to understand something. Going out and sharing our faith and having a plan to plant new churches has an impact. I mean, thousands of people became Christians. Thousands of people who, as far as we know, otherwise would not have so we can move forward and not repeat past mistakes. Mistakes are unavoidable. Let's just make no mistakes. Okay? Let's not repeat old ones. Okay, so this slide kind of demonstrates it. The letter was published in 2003, February 2003. But just so you get a little historical context, Kip McKean had been stepped down as the leader of our movement already in 2002. Actually, 2001 he went on statical. 2002 it became permanent that he returned to that position. The letter made no mention of that. One other world sector leader who was in a lot of crisis in his leadership also was taken out. Henry's letter made no mention of any of the changes that were happening. And I'm not here to tell you that sufficient change was happening, but I do want you to know that people were trying to make some changes. It wasn't that we were unaware of this. But part of the problem was there was a vacuum. And I'm just going to read this quote from the article. There remained an informational vacuum that the Creed letter alone seemed to fill. The informational vacuum, though, was the unfortunate byproduct of the ICC leadership trying to facilitate greater reconciliation with Kip McKean. In other words, we didn't publicize all of the conversations because we were hoping to keep him. We weren't trying to alienate him or lose him, but the truth is that was a good intention. But because of that lack of communication, the letter came out and sort of seemed to be the explanation of why these other things had happened, but it wasn't connected. The letter was its own independent entity that came out in 2003. So, to make the assumption that the crisis happened because of the letter is actually not helpful. It doesn't help us solve our issues. The letter itself wasn't actually full of factual statements. It painted the leadership of the ICC with one color and one brush. It talked about leadership, and I will tell you this, that's no more true of the leadership than it was of the membership. And we had leaders who wanted to be leaders. There was some ego in that, and I see God's hand pruning them out of the leadership. I also see members who wanted leaders on pedestals. And that wasn't helpful. Because that made these leaders vulnerable to a lot of temptation and giving into their own weaknesses. So the members and the leaders have some complicity in this, but not everyone is guilty of all the same things. It's important to understand. And some people were very good servant leaders who absolutely had the best interests of their members at heart, and they weren't, looked down on in 2003. They were surviving and doing their best, but the truth was there was a lot of turmoil. And most of the turmoil, I believe, came from we didn't know what had happened. We were surprised. And that shock doesn't help. So, the good news is that 90,000 people did stay faithful. And that's kind of the rebirth of our movement again. And things stabilized pretty much by 2006. And we've been growing pretty stably at 1.5% to 2% every year since then. So here's just the fact. In 1999, the ICC experienced a tipping point in growth where the rate of members leaving surpassed the rate of members being added irreversibly. So our real problem was identifiable in 99. Okay? And it's just important for us to actually do this. Another assumption was that the ICC was consistently growing exponentially with multiplication effect up to 2003. Now, who remembers the discipleship study and the one disciple making one disciple graph? Who remembers that? Okay, who was inspired by that? I was. Man, what a great plan. You realize in that plan that we could evangelize the world, actually not just evangelize the world, baptize the whole world in 33 years. Which sort of has a biblical ring to it, right? 33 years. That sounds like the age of Jesus. Okay, must be something there. But the truth is, this idea of just one disciple making another disciple. Now the thing that's quite interesting about that whole statistic, what percentage of annual group is one disciple making another disciple? 100% growth every year. Now, in all reality, that's not a sustainable model no matter how you look at it, right? But it makes a great point. It makes a point that Jesus' Jesus' plan of making disciples can evangelize the world. But when you really look at that graph that we made, what we're saying is 100% growth every year. Now here's the frightening thing. Because we didn't start with one, the Boston movement didn't start with one person, and after 1 year there were 2. And then after 2 years, there were 4. That's not how the Boston movement grew. It started with 30, and at the end of 1 year, it was probably 120. And after another year, it's probably 230. And you know what I'm saying? Like it wasn't 1, 2, 4, it was bigger. And so we kind of thought, hey, we're doing even better. You know, wow, we're like, look at this, we're ahead of schedule. but here's what it looks like. But we were comparing ourselves, to be quite honest, an impossibly sustainable model. This idea of 100% growth every year, man, churches don't grow like that. Like, that's just not possible. And I know when I say, well, for God all things are possible. That's true, but He has limited the success of the Great Commission through disciples. Like, there's some human factors in this plan. And so, the world wasn't evangelized in a week or a day. And even when we say the world's evangelized, that simply means the gospel went out to all corners of the world. That doesn't mean everybody heard it. You know what I'm saying? There's new generations of people coming all the time. There's infants. I mean, there's a little bit, just so you understand it, in the Scripture, there's a little bit of exaggeration occasionally. It's a writing tool. So, all creatures under heaven and earth have heard is not necessarily a factual statement as much as it is a description of what's going on. Even the word cosmos, the word cosmos in Greek meant the Greek world. We think of the cosmos being like the whole universe. Yeah. But in Greek arrogance, the Greek world was the universe. Okay? So the word cosmos has a meaning. It's not necessarily literally true. Do you know what I'm saying? So this isn't to take away that the gospel hadn't moved out. It's just to say, be careful about how we read into a statement what's trying to be communicated. So here's what the discipleship study, the blue line, that's where we should be, and there's the green line. That was the growth of the ICOC. And so what's interesting is exponential growth. The only way to evangelize the world is exponential growth. And exponential growth is pretty simple to measure, because if you're growing exponentially, it simply means you grew more this year than you grew the year before. If you just grow a little more, that's all you need to know, that's exponential. If you grow the same amount, that's linear. If you grow in decreasing amounts, that's negatively exponential. And if you grow consistently and in decreasing amount, then that's negative linear growth. So you see how that works? So exponential means we're just doing better and better. But if you actually look at what happened in the ICOC, between 1989 and 2002, we were already growing linearly. Why this is important? We didn't have a plan that was going to evangelize the world. How we were going about this plan was not sufficient. Now, that's kind of tough because a lot of us thought it was. We thought we really were on the way to succeed at this, but this plan was not working the way we had hoped. But number two, that's encouraging because when you figure out something wasn't going right, then you have opportunity to change, to reconsider, to think up maybe new strategies, etc. You understand what I'm saying? Like, it's one thing to fail, it's another thing to fail and know there's some kind of explanation. Because then there's something you can change, and your hope isn't blind, your faith isn't blind, you can hope in something new. So, again, to present this information in a different format, here's the growth of the movement, and the red letters for annual growth means that it's less than the previous year. And so blue means it's more than it's ever been, and red means it's going down. It's less than it has been in the past. So what happens is we grew exponentially up until 1989. Every year we were growing more and more. Then in 1990 to 95, our average growth was just barely above what 1989 was. So that's that's why we became linear. And then actually, in the 7 years following, we actually are a little bit less than in the 6 previous years. We're growing linearly, but we're slowing. Does that make sense? So when you actually look at this information, the question is, so what happened in 1990? Like, let's go back to 1990 and ask ourselves what was going on in our movement. Again, this is that same graph. So the point here, the bottom line of statistical growth isn't the total number of additions, but the increase of members. Growing means membership increases. So membership increases. It's important to understand how this came to pass that we stopped growing exponentially. And here's another graph that helps. There's the period, this first period here. This is exponential growth. And then this is exponential additions. In other words, exponential growth stopped there, but every year we were baptizing more and more people. So it was going exponentially. That didn't stop till 1995. But at the same time, exponential deletions, the red, it was also continuing, and it continued to 1999. In other words, we kept losing. There's a pointer on here. We were losing people consistently. There we go. So we were losing more and more people, and we couldn't stop that. We weren't fixing our problem. We weren't fixing our problem here. It just continued. And so, again, just kind of looking at the data from a different point of view, this has got a lot of data. You don't need to pay too much attention. But what it's simply saying is, all of these, we had what was called world sectors. We had 8 world sectors, and then for the purpose of this study, Los Angeles is considered a world sector. But here's where they all hit their tipping points. And not everyone was predicted crisis. Now, the fact is, those two also went into crisis in 2003. Because we were so interconnected, the crisis didn't connect. They should have waited 1 more year. But the truth is, we were all heading for crisis. So it isn't just one world sector that had a problem. And why this is important is, there's something about how we were building churches that needed to be reconsidered. Okay, so if we go back, this graph shows the annual growth of our movement every year. 1979, we grew 160%. But that actually, the statistic, the only reason that's less than 1980 is the church in Lexington restarted June 1st, 1979. So that's just 7 months. So in 7 months, the Lexington church, which would become the Boston church, grew 160%. The next year, 175%. When something is small, it's easier for it to grow. Typically, less people, less problems. Just to be honest. Okay. 1981 is down already to 71%, but the total membership of our whole movement at the end of 81 is 368 members. So we're not very big, right? 82 were 626 members at the end, grows about the same. And then dips down in 83. There's a surge in 1984. See, it goes up. That surge is because the new church plantings we put out there actually were starting to gain some momentum. And they were starting to add to this complete statistic. So that surge was from the new churches being planted. And that's just a little box explains that. And then there's a second box, this surge. Here's something very interesting that happened. There's a 4-year period where the Boston church assimilated into this discipling movement other churches of Christ that had their roots, all but one, in the Church of Christ. So they basically pulled in a number of churches. That was a great surge. More than most of us would understand. Here's the numbers that work out. But here's the growth of the whole ICOC. Here's the Boston movement. So we didn't plant these churches, but 47% of the increase came from these new churches coming in. 68% the next year, 46. On the average over those 4 years, almost half the growth of the ICOC took place because we were bringing into our fellowship other churches, into our movement. And that stopped. That stopped because it wasn't a strategy that the leadership of the ICOC intended. Now, at this point in time, I'm still going to talk about the leadership of the ICOC like I wasn't much part of it, because I was in Stockholm, Sweden, struggling with a little team of people to baptize 20 people. You know what I'm saying? Like I wasn't in any of these big meetings. I wasn't this big player or anything. I was part of the mission efforts of the Stockholm Church. Was the 8th church in our movement. The Moscow Church would have been the 100th church in our movement. So in the 5 years between Stockholm and Moscow, we planted over 90 churches. Okay, so we were a church planting movement. We look at the next slide. Let's see here. So if we go back to this graph. Sorry, I seem to skip back. Okay. So we come up on something else here. We come up on this moment. I mean, what our general statistics show us is this: the bigger something gets, the slower it grows. That's just typical. What happens here, though, is why this increase right here? And this increase took place not because of actually any positive factor. It took place because this was representing a negative. And what happened was, we had one congregation that had significantly grown in size, the Boston congregation. It was almost 20% of the membership of the whole ICOC, and it started to fail. And so what happened was, we have this graph. And this is showing what's in the little red area. That's showing the percent of our membership that was in a church that wasn't growing. So in 1992, even though the whole movement as a whole is growing, 43% of our membership were in churches that were not growing. See, that's a pretty big indicator of a problem, right? And they lost quite a few hundred members in Boston. And so it's all over the paper, but it never really got truly fixed. It got somewhat, splinted, but it never had the growth it had in the beginning. And so this becomes part of our problem because we didn't deal with this phenomenon. At this moment, 33 churches in our movement did not have positive growth. 33 out of 121. There's the total number of churches. There's the ones with... So what do we see happening as we're approaching 2002? More and more churches are not growing. So we're planting more and more churches, but more and more churches aren't growing. And for the most part, these are the bigger churches. So what's happening is, by 2002, 50% of our membership were in churches that were not numerically growing. So we had this plan to evangelize the world, but there was a back door. And the problem was this negative line, the amount of people leaving. We weren't properly dealing with this. So we had a mandate that came out in 1990. Every church in a megacity must build a megachurch if they are to reach every person with the gospel. Okay? Now, I hate to say this, but I think this is where some ego and the part of our leadership really went astray. Because we weren't talking about being megachurches up until then. That wasn't the point. The point was evangelizing the world, and we did a lot of that through small group. Suddenly, we're now focusing on something different. Mega churches meet in big halls. Mega churches have mega programs. Mega churches, have big administrations. Mega churches are mega organizations. And is that really how the church should be, or is that really what's best? It might work, but just to make a decision to build it that way it's not a very quality-oriented goal. It's a quantity-oriented goal, and it doesn't really make any sense. So We were a church planting movement that began in Boston in 1979. And then we started to become a megachurch movement. That became the focus. And it was pretty confusing. But just to give a little history, okay, this is the Boston Church of Christ. This is a bulletin from June 17th, 1984. Okay? Just read the quote here. The beauty of God's plan is that a church of 1,000 members can remain united under one eldership and yet still retain the intimacy of a small group in each of its 25 house churches. It is clear that God's plan for church leadership includes a house church unit, and we at the Boston Church are continuing to search the Scriptures diligently to ensure a full understanding of the role of the house church in building our work here. This is 1984. The church now is approximately 1,000 members. Read a little further. Okay, I'm jumping ahead, sorry. So in this bulletin article, there's a lot of scriptures quoted. It's really a biblical idea. We see this in the book of Acts. We see house churches. We see this idea of small groups meeting in Christians' homes. But when this article was written, the membership of the church was about 1,000 members. In the next 5.5 years, the Boston church would grow by more than 2,000. So I don't know about you, but that leaves me with kind of a positive feeling about house churches. That actually can be a very effective model. Now, I do want to make the point, no structure is a solution. Okay? God's church grows because God makes it grow. And so there's no structure that guarantees growth, but there's structures that facilitate growth better than others. And you know, if our purpose is planting and watering, some structures allow planting and watering to be done better than other structures. So that's what you have to evaluate the structure. How does it actually increase or hurt the ministry? That's going to be the measure. But something happened. Beginning in the 1990s, a new strategy for church growth was adopted by the Boston church leadership with the following explanation. One of the new cutting edges of world evangelism lies in the major cities as the world becomes more urbanized. The challenge before the churches already located in these megacities is to grow from the present sizes to become megachurches of over 10,000 disciples. Acts 4, verse 4. I mean, I don't know how they're quoting Acts 4, verse 4, saying the church would be over 10,000 disciples. It does say there was 5,000 men. Okay? Remember, this is the church in Jerusalem pre any persecution. Okay? Is this the New Testament model?
No.
Well, as far as we know, this is the biggest church in the history of the New Testament's writing, right? Like, this would have been the biggest church on the ground. When the letter Paul wrote to the Corinthians, when he wrote that letter, that church was probably not even 300 members. When Paul wrote 1 Thessalonians, that church was probably under 100 members. Like these weren't mega churches. They were church plantings. And a lot of times they were still meeting in the homes. So, later in the same issue, the Boston elders repeated their commitment to this new goal in a personal comment to Kip and Elena McKean. Because of the vision you've given us, we are committed to building a New Testament-sized church of 10,000 disciples. See, I hate to say it, but there's a drum that's being beat here. We got to be 10,000. We got to be 10,000. A mega church is 10,000. I mean, first of all, who cares? I mean, what's 10,000? Like, where did this number? Why not 20,000? Why not 100,000? Like, where's this number coming from?
Right.
But part of it is this is what the world was defining the megachurch as, especially in the U.S. And this was enamoring. People like this concept. Not everybody, but some people really like this concept. The following week, under the title A Year of Conquest, the Boston leadership again reiterated its goals for 1990 and stated in point number 9, as Boston goes, so goes the movement. Now, this is going to be, unfortunately, the most prophetic words ever spoken by anybody I know. As Boston goes, so goes the movement. In other words, what's happening in Boston is going to be precedent setting. It's actually going to be an example. And what we're going to see is it actually came true. But not the way people thought. So Boston now needs to lead the way in becoming a megachurch of over 10,000 disciples. That was January 14. But But interestingly so, they launched this plan. It got publicized. I was actually in London, England at this time. I just heard about it from my friends. And but then something started to change. They started to realize, boy, this is like more difficult than we thought. So 2 weeks later, the Boston Bulletin affirmed this commitment with an honest admission that we don't yet know how to grow large churches, mega churches. The leadership commitment and faith for this new plan was emphasized in the following 2 must statements. And this is in the article. To win the world for Jesus, churches must grow without limit in size. Okay, really? Are we really going to stand by that one? Like, we're going to say that to win the world, the church must... Like, what is it? What do we mean by that? Because what it meant in Boston at the time was single congregations in a single city must grow. Do we know that? Do we know that the only way to build a church is to have one congregation in one city? Like, are we so sure? And then it goes on to say, again, the statement was repeated that as Boston goes, so goes the kingdom, followed by a bold prediction that the Boston will pioneer the way by becoming a church of 10,000 in the 1990s. Okay, I hate to say it, but the gift of prophecy is not among us. And this is as good a proof as anything. Okay? What a statement. And we crossed the line here. Because we're starting to tell God what He's going to do. And I got to tell you something. We didn't catch it. I was in the euphoria of, wow, look what God is doing all around the world. This is at the time, the Moscow church we planted a year later. You know, like, we were seeing amazing things. But we weren't paying attention to what we had built. We weren't learning the lessons from what we had built. So, go a little further. 2 months later, the Boston leadership went on to announce the following. By the grace of God, we're the largest single congregation of any kind in Boston history. Being a pioneer in areas of church growth, we occasionally wander away from the path, all the while confident that God will provide a voice to Scripture saying, this is the way, walk in it. We now find ourselves in such a place. There are symptoms that indicate we have wandered off the path. In 1989, we grew very little numerically. Now, I got to tell you, that's not what the January Bulletin had said. The January 1990 Bulletin said we grew by more than 500. Suddenly, we're getting this recount. We actually didn't grow that much. Right in this time as well, Kip McKean has moved from Boston to Los Angeles. Let me comment on how convenient that is. Because the Boston church was struggling in a great way. So he took a group of people with him to LA, and then just continue reading. Although many disciples were made, we did not do a good job of keeping people faithful. Now here's a theological mistake. Making disciples has 2 parts. Yes. Baptizing them and teaching them to obey everything I commanded you. That's what Jesus said. This is saying, we made disciples, but we didn't do a good job of keeping people faithful. That's making disciples. Keeping people faithful is making disciples. We're all in the process of being made in the image of Christ. We've been given His righteousness. We've been given forgiveness. We've been given sonship, childhood with God. We've been given things that He owns, He shared with us. But we're still a work in process when it comes to how we live our lives. And so we're being made into disciples in process. Right? So making disciples doesn't quit after baptism. In fact, I think the hardest work is after baptism. So he says here, we did not do a good job of keeping people faithful. Although many have great relationships, there are too many who do not. We as leaders are convinced after much prayer, reflection, and discussion, the problem are twofold. We as leaders have failed to meet the needs of the members, and 2, the organizational structure is out of date, except for the general guidelines and principles laid out in the Bible. The specific organizational structure is not sacred. Now, this is kind of interesting because whereas the whole movement, the house churches, came with a nice Bible study and lots of biblical example, we're starting to shift, but through human reasoning. Not really through a biblical mandate. And so, then we go a little further in this article. Everything is permissible, but not everything is constructive. Nobody should seek his own good, but the good of others. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, 23-24. So what's our new scripture for building the church? Everything goes. We can do whatever we need to. Wow. I don't really, I will say this just shows a weakness right here in what we were thinking. This is not deep theological thinking. This is simply, I'm going to do what I want to do, and here's why I'm going to do it. The Bible says everything's permissible. Okay? So then after reviewing some of the challenges inherent in sending out many mission teams, and observing that the decision makers had stopped leading at the house church level, the article stated that the several problems had developed. And look at these issues. Decision makers have too little contact with the people. The most experienced, qualified leaders are leading leaders rather than leading the people. The speed with which teams have been sent out has disrupted relationships. And with the structure, many second-line leaders have developed a mindset of waiting to be told what to do rather than using their own creativity, gifts, and initiatives. Now, next slide. And finally, the article continued, on Saturday night, March 10th, the church heard exciting plans which will put us back on the path. Much more than just a reorganization, a conceptual new plan was unveiled. The zone, averaging 150 to 300 members, becomes the basic church unit, and the house church units no longer used. The zone, in fact, will function as the house church of the Bible. Romans 16:3-16. The challenge before us in Boston, however, is to build a megachurch. You see, we're sinking our ship here. Because we've changed the end posts, like the goal has changed. And this goal to build a megachurch, now everything's expendable to build this goal. But the question is, well, we've just acknowledged, if you go back a slide, we've acknowledged the problems we have. Decision makers are not involved enough. Experienced leaders are not leading at the house church level. And then the structure, many people, the structure's so solid, many second-line leaders aren't motivated to take initiative. They're waiting. Well, that's our problem. We've created that. We've created an expectation of being told what to do, when in fact they should be being trained to listen to the Spirit, to open up the Scripture, and to seek God's will. So we are making some major spiritual mistakes here. A few of those underlying assumptions can be identified from the preceding narrative. And again, I just read these. One, a New Testament-sized church of 10,000 disciples is a phrase that infers the so-defined megachurch to be a biblical mandate. By phrasing it that way, we're kind of saying this is what it means to be the church of the New Testament. You got to build to be 10,000. I just don't think that's biblical. Though that contradicts the statement, okay? Churches must grow without limit in size, and every church in a megacity must build a megachurch. These must statements were in fact logical extensions of a previously articulated principle of ICOC church building strategy, beginning in about 1986, one city, one church, which was interpreted to mean that each city must have a single congregation with a single leadership structure, and thereby if the congregation continues to grow in a single city, it must eventually become a mega church. See, if you follow that strategy, that means if there's 20,000 disciples in a city, they have to go under one leadership. Is that really, what kind of administrative nightmare are we talking to be 20,000 people, right? I mean, the biggest church I've ever personally been in charge of was Moscow when I left. It was 2,700 members. I tell you what, that's a lot of people, and I was not the leader of the Moscow church. I was the trainer and facilitator of a group leadership, because there's no way one person can lead that. This model of one person at the top breaks down terribly once the group gets too big. Okay, it doesn't provide what's needed. And then the statement, the zone will function as the house church of the Bible. In other words, the Boston leadership was saying that the relational intimacy of a living room could be reproduced in a rented facility, and the discipleship, training, and fellowship possible with a small group of people could be effectively reproduced with 5 to 10 times as many people present. Also note the statement makes no attempt to reconcile a previous declaration made 6 years ago in the Bulletin of June 1984. It is clear that God's plan for church leadership includes the house church unit. And we at the Boston Church are continuing to search the Scriptures diligently to ensure a full understanding of the role of the house church in building our work here. The first sacrifice for the megachurch goal was the small group house church. And this would become a sacrifice made in many places. And we have to understand something. Why are we making this decision? Because of this artificial goal of a megachurch. I mean, we need to evangelize the world. It's our mandate. But when that's going to get done and how that looks, we got to play that with the Spirit. Like we have to walk in step with God here. Defining every step, having a plan that works in every situation just isn't true. And it's interesting, and this was the one that kind of hurts me the most. The organizational structure is out of date. It says here, the new plan noticeably limited the proposed structural changes to the membership level of the congregation. So we have a structural problem, but rather than change the leadership, in other words, maybe we shouldn't have one guy at the top. That doesn't even get thrown out. No, we got to keep a guy at the top, and because there's so many levels, we're going to make the bottom level bigger. Like we're going to make the units at the bottom bigger. Rather than make the top flat and spread out the leadership. That was another possibility, but it was not considered. Because when you're building a megachurch, well, I think that would be the right way to build a megachurch anyways, but we had another thing happening. Yes, we said there was one church in one city, but what snuck in the late 80s was one church, one city, one leader. And this became the ICOC model. That every church had a singular leader. I think this leadership can mean different things. But if you mean that one church has one decision maker, then that's bound to hit a ceiling when that person's capacity has been reached. There's a reason why in the United States the average church size, this is a statistic probably from before megachurches, but the average church size was about 80 members. Why was that? Because the average pastor, minister, could take care of about 80 people. Anything more than that, and it's already too much. In other words, your structure can limit the growth. Your structure can be part of the problem. So we need to be flexible. We need to be looking for solutions. But here's to me, maybe the most ironic thing. The Boston leadership said we've lost contact with the average member. Look what this observation. For the Boston congregation, this would mean that there had been previously 86 adult house churches. So they've gone from 26 house churches to 86. And it's served by 172 male and female leaders. So there was a man and a woman leading each house church. There would now be 17 zones served by 34 male and female full-time ministers. Paradoxically, the net result of this plan was to exchange a base organizational unit whose leadership was half full-time and half non-full-time to a base leadership where all the leaders are full-time. They're all staff people. Now do you understand our church, we call it clergy-laity divide. Because up until this time in Boston, the prestigious role of leadership was being a house church leader, and it was shared by everyone. Right. But that was taken away from the membership. And now they were just members of a zone, and now they had one leader for 100 that we reduced leadership by 2/3, and then got rid of all the lay leadership. So there'd be a meeting of house church leaders, zone leaders, they're in the house churches, and there's no lay leadership being represented. Now there was some Bible talks, but it seemed Bible talks started to fade away as well for many of the adults. And their midweeks became more of a focus, etc. And we were becoming weaker and weaker. We were losing something. So, yeah. So we made this comment. As the Boston church goes, so goes the movement. Have you seen that graph before? This one's more jagged, but that looks like the graph we looked at the beginning. Okay? Here is just up close, those 11 years. Now look at the whole ICOC. Look familiar? In other words, the pattern that happened in Boston actually became the standard pattern for church growth in our movement. And as Boston went, so the movement did go. And so here's a graph showing all the churches of more than 2,000 members. This is the average growth for them, and there's the membership. They had the same thing. They were all reaching a tipping point and starting to decrease. And actually, if you look at all the other sizes of churches, this is like a graph for more than 2,000, 1,500 to 2,000, 1,000, 1,500, 500 to 1,000. You see the same thing. The only difference is that these churches that didn't grow so big, they peaked quicker. See, that's the smaller the church in the end. These are the same age as these churches, but they peaked quicker and then decreased. So this is the common factor. How we were building churches didn't work. And so we need to rethink this. And I just want to tell you, we haven't figured this one out yet completely. Still working on this. I have some of my own convictions about it. I believe part of it is an emphasis on group leadership. Part of it is making sure that there's not a clergy-laity split in any kind of congregation. That ministry is not something that is monopolized by full-time ministry people. Yeah. Ministry is something that the church participates in, and we're all learning to serve and develop in our ministry capacity. So, to take the story to a sort of logical thing, Kip moved to Los Angeles and basically did the same thing that he had done in Boston. Boston never got fixed. LA then just was on steroids. Because whereas Boston was made up of free will sacrifice and people moving to Boston to be trained, LA was built on what I will call taxation and recruitment. And so it was much more intentional, but almost the more intentional was, the less spiritual the process became. And so in this article, it was reported, this is just kind of reviewing Kip's move. And basically by 1994, this article proclaimed, LA is the new model church. We just lost our model. For all of these years, Boston has been our model. Boston is now shipwrecked. It's just eking out some minimal growth over the next 8 years. And now we're all looking to LA, and LA is all exciting, etc. But LA is sucking resources from other churches. Boston planted 50 churches. LA planted 9. Boston sent out hundreds of leaders. In the LA plantings, LA sacrificed 55 members and very few leaders. You understand what I'm saying? Like the LA church wasn't a model. I call it the impossible example. Because no one could imitate this. No one had the resources to imitate building Los Angeles. And so this was very frustrating for many regular ministers in the church, because people are taking their leaders to help build LA, and then they're asked, why aren't you growing like LA? And the person is so, like, why are you taking my leaders? And so when I went to LA in 1999, the church was already 10 years old. There were 10 regions, and only one region leader had been converted in LA, and all the others had been imported. So the top leadership of the church was all imported in the LA church. This is not an example you can imitate. When you go to Moscow, one of the beauties of Moscow is nobody's going to give you anything, so stop waiting. There's no Russian-speaking elders waiting to come over and help us. There's no Russian-speaking teachers. What you got is what you got. What the Lord gives you, and you just got to, so you can't wait around. You just have to keep moving and praying and looking for God's will. So now the churches are facing a dilemma, because we've got a church planting schedule and we've got a mega church building mandate. How do you do two things at the same time? How do we make this one church bigger and send out good people to plant churches? And sadly, the result was we started planting with much less quality than we had in earlier days. Just another little slide to kind of show what's going on in LA. And it's hard to see here, but this is showing Los Angeles showing shared growth. In other words, every time it took a significant leadership component out of another church, for argument's sake, I added that church to what I would call the LA future. And what you can then see is they borrowed. This is the membership of LA. It peaked at 9,300 at the end of 2001. Never did reach 10,000 at an end-year number. And that was borrowed growth from all these other churches. It's true growth if you look at how it affected the other churches, was really under 6,000. Now, 6,000 disciples is still 6,000 disciples, but this is an unimitatable model. And what's important to see is that they were taking leaders from other churches, and here's the numbers. They got, right at the beginning, 62 and 63, 179, 120, 50, 68, 69. These are all the numbers. You know, some of these churches stopped growing and never recovered after making the sacrifice for LA. They gave up 60 small group leaders, and then their own church collapsed. Doesn't make any sense. This is all to build a mega church, which is supposed to be an example. And see, what the 80s were about was like being an example. But the 90s was about building a mega church. And the truth is, we didn't have a good example. And in the end, see, this is the true stat for LA. LA ended up doing the same thing that Boston had done, just with 3 times better effect, but the pattern was the same. It reached a tipping point and was collapsing, and all of this is pre-2003. So, you know, again, I'll kind of brush through this. I'm just reviewing it. An important moment. Sorry. Oh, I see those. See that little point right there? This is where, if you knew the stats of the ICOC, you would know that we're not about to exponentially cover the world in 33 years. Because that's where our line crossed. Like that's where, if you had this data, which nobody I know of was processing this data, though I know that there were a few people who must have had access. 1994, we had a new announcement. Oh, here's our new goal. We didn't hear the exponential goal anymore. Our new goal is to plant a church in every country that has a city of more than 100,000 people. Now my question, what kind of goal is that? By the year 2000? Well, I mean, it's obviously doable by human pushing and pressure, but why? Honestly, I think there was a change of the goalposts. Because now we're going to take our focus off the fact that we are way off track. You know, this whole idea of we're going to evangelize the world one generation, 1994 was the year where we had to go, we got to change something radically, because this ain't going to happen. And the idea that now we're going to plant more churches in more countries, we haven't fixed our own problem with church growth, it's ludicrous. Did you see what I'm saying? So sadly, this didn't solve anything. So we had the evangelization proclamation. And now this is basically saying we're going to plant these churches for the next 6 years. There was a financial component to it. I mean, it was very exciting. But the question is, was this a well thought out plan? This is a very interesting stat, and I'm sorry, these things are very busy, I know, with information. But the blue, these are all, that's the years, you know, you can see the years, 79 to 2002. This is the average growth of a new church planting at this time. That blue, and there's the number down there, it's 22. That number is the number of new churches planted. Okay? So, see that there's 20 churches planted there, and look at the growth. That's the 5-year growth of those 20 churches. So, this is to make it all easier. If you look at groups of 3, in the first 3 years, any church we planted between 87 and 89, after 3 years was 294 members. 294 members is a self-supporting church. We were planting self-supporting churches. In 5 years, the average church planted in these 3 years was 446 members. I would say we're actually doing a pretty good job planting churches that had some life to them. But if you go just the next 3 years, what's interesting is it's 156 after 3 years and 230. Almost exactly half that number. So we're becoming 50% less effective. The next 3 years, now we're down to after 3 years, 75. And after 5 years, 107. Now, a 75-member church is barely self-supporting. It might possibly be a little bit dependent on the concept, what makes up the membership, but not a guarantee. But getting close. 5 years, yes. But see, so it's taking 5 years for a church to be 107 members on the average. The 6-year plan starts, and what the 6-year plan says is, we will provide mission funding for 2 years. What we're saying is we're expecting someone to be self-supporting in 2 years. Okay? Now, this is our data. Our data is, at this time, will be 75 members. That's the average. We're just going to be barely making it at 3 years, but the 6-year plan only gave 2 years of support. Because in order to plant all these new churches, it took quite a lot of funding. But here's the truth. So 96 to 98, after 3 years, the average church is 40 in size. That can't be self-supporting. They're making a choice between meeting publicly and having certain things, or having a full-time ministry person, probably just one person, not two. Okay, now, you can build a church without ministries, full-time ministry staff. There's a model for that. But that's not a model that we're accustomed to. We have some work to do to develop that better. But, I don't even have the numbers here. There's not enough data to give you 3 years or 5 years. But you see the point, we're becoming less effective. And if you look at these numbers, it's very interesting. There's 33 churches planted with an average size of 294. Now we've got 58 churches planted with an average size of half that. So we're doubling the number of churches for these 3-year segments, but we're halving their effect. So what does that end up looking like? So we're basically, we have 33 plantings, they grow 9,000. 58 plantings, they grow 9,000. Now we have 170, they grow 8,000. Now we have 109 plantings, they grow 4,500. In other words, we're becoming massively, massively less effective. And the 5-year growth is also declining. So what does this tell us? Basically, we were capable of growing a certain amount, but by planting all these new churches, we were dividing that out. We got to set a limit, and this is what it looked like on paper. The average team size before the 6-year plan was 16. That was the average team sent out. The average team size from the 6-year plan forward, and hundreds of churches were planted, was 7.2. You're sending 7 people to plant a church. Sometimes, nobody was really trained. But they had visa support. They were able to go to that country or whatever. But see, what we started happening now is, this is the blue line shows average team size. Okay, so that's the actual numbers. That shows the average over the period of time. But here we have our first failure, church planting failure that didn't get replanted. We had a couple of failures earlier, but they were replanted a couple of years later. But this is our first failure that was still a failure by 2002. And now we're having, 1998, now we're having 6 churches fail. We had 5 churches fail in 2000, 1 church failed in 1999. By the end of 2002, 13 of the new church plantings had already ceased to exist. So, what was this new strategy? This new strategy was plant new churches, but I had moved to Boston with a missions degree and saw the quality of their small group. Mission teams didn't go out until they were trained fully. Many times the mission team was delayed in being sent out. Now we put a deadline on ourselves, and we're going to send whoever we can. One poor brother up in the third world said, yeah, another planting, I've got a grandma, an unbaptized teen, and a Bible talk leader. They're the only ones that can go. And it was kind of a sad commentary on what he was trying to accomplish. But he was from this decision. And so, just so you know it, by 1997, 98, the feedback was coming to the world sector leaders. This isn't working. And we were told, because I was one of the people saying this isn't working, we were told, we've made this decision, we got to finish it, it's on paper, people will be discouraged otherwise. And I'm like, are you kidding me? That is what this is about? Saving prestige? But sadly, when the organization got so solidified that kind of decision was being made and being sustained by ego, not by the Spirit.
Right.
And we need to acknowledge that. We got off track. And so, I feel bad for these weaker church plantings. And, we planted a few of these weak ones ourselves in the former Soviet Union. That we didn't have anyone, the people that were eligible to go back and do a Dushanbe, Tajikistan, were really not capable of sustaining the church. They're good-hearted people. They made a sacrifice, but the church wasn't sustainable. But this plan to go into all these places puts us in that position of sending people that aren't ready. So we went from sending well-trained teams to sending whoever was eligible. And God bless them, a lot of people just wanted to go. We had two brothers, God bless their hearts. They went to Tunisia. And they were there on very tenuous visas. And so they had to keep kind of going from city to city, just trying to stay alive out of trouble, study the Bible with a few people. I call it Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Because they're sweet guys, but completely untrained, to go into Tunisia, a Muslim country. They're scared for their lives. In the end, they went back home. They come from Paris with their tails between their legs. Praise God, I had a chance to meet them in the mid-2000s, like 2005. I met them and said, guys, thank you for what we did, and please forgive us. Like, you should never have been sent out there. Yeah, that wasn't fair. Thank you that you were willing. You know what I'm saying? So, I'm not saying everyone got apologized to that needed to be, but the 6-year plan didn't solve any of our problems. And so, this is just what the average church looked like in our movement that was more than 500 members. This is how they grew. They reached a peak by year 7 and then started to decline. That's the average. We never fixed this. We never figured this out. And so after a while, this caught up to us. And it had to collapse. So it's interesting, this is a quote from the LA apology letter that the elders and evangelists wrote. I was actually on staff in LA at this time. And what's interesting is we apologize to the church for what we led the church to, this brink. But what's funny about this, when you read it, it's sad, is we're saying the same things that the Boston eldership had apologized for 13 years earlier. Basically, a disconnect between what the people were feeling and needing and what we were doing as a leadership. Okay, so, it's important for us to understand our history.
Yeah.
That's probably, there's so much more I could share, but I just want to open it up to some questions. I want to finish this with one thing, where the meat of this comes to is the Great Commission has 2 pieces, according to Matthew's version. Go make disciples, baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and then teach them to obey everything I have commanded you. That's 2 components of making disciples. The first part is much simpler and easier than the second part. And I would say as a movement, I don't know of many movements that got the first part of this down so well. Who actually were able to plant many effective plantings, especially in those early years. But the sad thing is, we didn't do the second part well. And we suffered for that immensely, and the church suffered for that immensely. And we need to do the first part well and the second part well. And I believe that actually part of the reason things got so discouraging was when you're in a situation where by the 7th year of any church, 61% of all the people who've ever been baptized have actually fallen away. How discouraging is that? 6 out of the 10 people you knew over these past 7 years are gone. It only got worse as the years progressed. And see, we got to fix that. But that can only be fixed through the Spirit of God working in discipleship. Through people maturing in Christ, from us doing what we're supposed to be doing, and that is helping each other in our day-to-day walks with God. So, there's a whole other little study I could do, but there's a biblical study at the end of this with some observations about how we could build better at the end of the study. But I just thought I'd just open up for questions. I know you've been very kind and patient, and I know it's a lot of information. We'll start back here.
Well, I have a lot of examples of when we were talking about back to Philippines, it was a bigger church, and we knew the things we were talking about, simple things, we heard them. And I was not in leadership, but I could just hear how the leaders were saying, if only they would let me stay in one place and not let people move around to make it build, to last. And that was the same message I heard over and over.
Right.
There were different leaders I would talk about. I was their pediatrician for their children, so I had a chance to talk about their hearts. And while you were talking, there was one thing that, one scripture that was going on, and actually a song that we sing with our kids. The wise man built his house upon the rock, and the foolish man built his house on sand. And it's really easy to study the Bible with people, and I knew from the very start that it's just making that faith grow that is the most difficult part. And like we said yesterday, it's easy to give birth. Not that it's easy to give birth, that's a big mistake. It's hard to give birth, it's hard to do them to delivery, but it's that growth forward that's the hardest part. That's where the grind, the big grind goes, right? But one thing that I noticed all through these years that is a big mistake is people not speaking up the truth in love. And when I struggle, I have to speak the truth that I'm a people pleaser. And I think as disciples, that's 90% of disciples. People just want to please God. But in the end, we tend to please. We don't notice that we tend to please people more and ourselves more than we want to please God. Things just have to be brought into the open in a very, very respectful way. That I'm not ready, that I can't do this. And I'm grateful that God has touched your heart to talk to us about these things. As we've seen them, they're obvious, but a lot of us are not willing to talk about them. So thank you.
Amen.
So looking forward, I'm curious, there's been discussion during strategies about, we talk about getting a sense of what the membership needs. And that's a skill in itself, it's a double-edged sword. Has there been any strategy or discussion with the churches you visited to really make that
I think this discussion is in full swing. And we have, right now, we've been sort of working on how we work as a global fellowship. And part of that now has been involving more voices in the plans, in the analysis, and the discussion of how we're building our churches. And I would say that the big theme right now is church health. What makes a healthy church? And I'm really excited about where a lot of the conversation is going. Also, we want to get more churches profiled that are healthy. We just need more reporting and good examples. The funniest thing is most places are really healthy. They're too busy to worry about sending out bulletins about how well they're doing. They're actually too busy for that. That's not what they're thinking. We have to make some effort to draw out those stories, but I do think there are some really great things going on. And there's some people, I think part of even what the next step in this is we need to help some people come through it. There's not everyone thinks we should go back and take such a close look at the past, but I believe it's what part of our membership needs as well to get our story more clear. Because many of us with very good intentions worked as hard as we could. And it was pretty frustrating and disappointing. And some people even lost their faith when things collapsed. But the truth was, this isn't God's fault. And we can learn from the past. And there's a story there. So I think the emphasis on church health is really big. And I also really want to say that we need to try many models. There isn't one size that fits all. There's a lot. We're all in different circumstances. There's a lot of things. The world's not going to be evangelized by full-time ministry people. It's going to be be evangelized by happy disciples who love Jesus. Like that's the strength of the church, not some kind of organizational strength, but a membership, a body strength. So we have to figure that out, and we're still, I think too many people are dependent on structural solutions, and they don't understand that there's a cultural solution. We've got to change our hearts, and that's the issue. It's not about structure. So 2 years ago, we were presented some in our leadership were wanting a structural solution. They wanted to establish an executive committee over at the ICOC. And I tell you what, they were not in tune with the voice of the people. Because when people started hearing that, they're like, what? We're going to go back there? You know, but we needed to have a conversation. And the conversation did result in some good development. But no, we're not going back there because it's an ineffective model for shepherding. Entrusting a few people with power of decision is not the way. It might make an organization work better. It doesn't make a church function better. We need leadership, but that leadership needs to be through maturity and example. So, when you think that being a disciple means you obey, that means being a leader means you command. But if you think about being a disciple being you imitate, that means being a leader means you model.
Come on.
And see, that's two very different paradigms of how leadership works. The second one being the right one. Thank you.
I just wanted to share, I was in a mega church, and right after baptism, I pulled into ministry, these are groups, whatever, and so you stand up or wash up. And I just have to share a story that, graphs we saw is a little bit saddening, but there were many of us. We truly show the value of God, and they're still there. And I think when we all get together and truly love God simply and humble ourselves before, it's not that we want to make a church, but we can really strengthen ourselves and our family instead of afraid of those mistakes that we make.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for your support.
Amen. I think a healthy church guarantees eventually a numerical growth trend. That's a healthy church. But numerical growth trend doesn't guarantee anything.
Right.
You can kind of make that happen by human effort, and that's not good. It will collapse. So our focus should be on church health, on being good disciples and happy disciples, and our Christian life should be enjoyable. There is suffering in the Christian life, but that wasn't intended to be like a full-time job.
Right.
It wasn't supposed to be 24/7. Suffering wasn't supposed to be coming to church on Sunday either. That wasn't supposed to be part of the suffering. Christian life is supposed to be enjoyable and lighthearted and God-focused. We are the ones that are more blessed than anybody on earth.
Yep.
So we need to accept that. And of course, it changes. We have to change our mindset too, and not let ourselves. Sometimes the world can make us feel like we're the unfortunate ones. No, we are the blessed ones. Absolutely. Okay.
If you're doing the graph, I've never really talked about the history of this migration, learning about it. So that's really cool. And you talked about a lot of that vision. It seems like you're always continually adding to our family, you're not. But that you did also mention about the depletion. Have we ever had an attack or a plan for people that we've been losing over this time?
Well, I think there's two things. I think going after lost sheep is a very noble cause and biblical. I think also we need to understand not everyone that got baptized actually got baptized for the right reason. And if you don't get baptized for the right reason, there's a sort of a minimal level of cognizance. Like you're doing this to surrender your life to God. If you're going into baptism with unrepentant of sin, that baptism is not baptism. I mean, if you're aware of it, it's another thing. After being a disciple for about 4 years, I was 29 years old, and one day it hit me, man, I am just so arrogant. Just a couple of things that happened. And then, am I even a Christian? And then I thought, well, that's arrogant. but I just didn't realize how arrogant that was, frankly. Like, it'd be easy to blame it on, oh, maybe I just need to get baptized again, that'll solve this. That was just my arrogance speaking. But it's good to acknowledge we will become aware of our sinfulness over time, and we need to act on it. Do the right thing about it. Another thought in mind, but it faded. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the lost sheep thing. I just want to say that I think we need to have some work on that, but I do think there are people that left and they don't want to come back. And you got to be careful you're just not running after your own tail, because that's it. But depending on how a church was built, that sort of changes this is a weird way to say it, but the quality of the leaver. Some leavers leave and they never really were part of us, as John said. Some leave because they actually just love, they've now fallen in love with the world and that they want to go back. And some leave because of good conscience, and we need to qualify that. Some people leave because something's going wrong with us, that in their conscience it doesn't work for them to stay with us right at this moment.
Right.
And we need to understand that too. We need to take that as a real possibility, that in order for them to keep a good conscience before God, they feel like they can't worship with us right now. That's very sad, but that's real, and you got to honor. Each person must stand before God with their own conscience.
I don't intend to go down a rabbit hole, but it's still a similar movement in many ways.
Kip's movement, as far as I can tell, you cannot get a real stat on it. But I think they hit their 11-year cycle last year, and I think it was pretty flat. So who knows their stats, because they don't publish them. But quite a few of their older leaders left in the last 2 years. So we had a group of 30 people come from his London church into our church in London about a year and a half ago. And then some others pretty significant leaders left that were part of this real movement in 2005, 6, 7, 8. So I just think, I don't think anything has changed. I don't think they're doing a lessons learned class and talking about this. There's still just this drive. Like he holds us guilty that we don't believe the world can be evangelized in a generation. My answer to that is, we need to evangelize the world, but who am I to put a time frame on it? And part of the ethos of his leadership was we're always in an emergency, therefore we're always under martial law, therefore I'm always going to be telling you what to do. Like it wasn't mature. It was very immature. So my prayer is that our movements become one again, that we'll reunite. I also pray that we'll figure out ways how to bring in other even groups into our movement, and also be willing to share with people even if they don't come into our movement. How can we lose by sharing what we have? It doesn't change any of my doctrine. I'm as clear on the doctrine as I ever was, but God's bigger than my concepts of doctrine. So I'm saved because God saves me, not because of just right information.
Yeah, you just can't find it out. We apparently are slated by the ICC to have a mission team arrive here next year. And I am curious what suggestions you would give us when our young members ask questions, wanting to know what to think.
Right. Well, I think they just need to know the story. And if you go to Kip's website, I'm public enemy number 1. I was the sad person who had the responsibility to ask him to step down in 2001. That felt to me. It was not a coup. I didn't talk to anybody else. I went to him, Matthew 18. And then he phoned the other world sector leaders to tell them about our conversation. Because I said either he resigned or I was going to resign. And within 10 days there was a vote of no confidence. And I didn't do anything to do that. He actually provoked that vote of no confidence by trying to get people on his side in this challenge. So, very unfortunate. I miss him because he's probably today still one of the greatest strategists I've ever met. And has a high capacity for thinking about plans. But, I can't belong to a movement if if it requires me to kiss the ring. I mean, he accuses me of taking the ICOC back to the mainline Church of Christ, which is my roots. But I would answer that with, well, there's another direction, that's called Catholicism, where there's a pope and a worldwide ecclesiastical structure that controls everything. Yeah? Do I have to choose? You know, can't we do something, just try to stay biblical and simple in the middle somewhere? But anyway, I do think education is the thing. But from a theological point of view, the International Christian Church is baptizing brothers and sisters into the body of Christ. I believe that completely. So the sad thing is that we're not working in cooperation together. I will say this, be wise, because you'll find them shadowing you wherever you go. That's what they do typically. So where we meet in Moscow, they meet right next door. Where we meet in Kiev, they meet next door. Like they follow our Bible discussions. They're like this little shadow organization. But from what I can understand, last year was not a significant year. So they're already plateauing at about 7,000 members. So, the Boston movement at the same time was 28,000 members. So we're not seeing a repeat of the Boston movement, but their number of followers, I know, is high. They don't have great retention. So, and you can't have great retention if you only focus on one side of the equation.
So one more question that's a side note. Looking at the list of people that you gave from Boston, which is also where I was at, and elders that were deeply respected and decisions that were made, as an elder in training group here at Cambridge, what advice would you give us to keep from falling into similarities?
Well, I think if you go to my website, missionstory.com, you'll find the article I wrote before this article. It was also for that degree program. And it's on charismatic leadership. And I think we need to understand how charismatic leadership works. Coming from a mainline Church of Christ background, we didn't value charismatic leadership. We valued the Bible was our authority. So if you couldn't show up from the Bible, no one was going to listen to you. We developed in our movement a higher level of charismatic authority than I'd ever been exposed to. And that's dangerous because you have people with the gift of persuasion. They're very persuasive. And they're also so excited, they're contagious. And so it's interesting to kind of understand the dynamics of charisma, how it works. I think we need to be aware of that. But I also think that there's great value in just prayer and collective wisdom. These are the two keys to keep us, on a good path. And we need to be innovators. We need to be looking for new ways to serve God. We need to be looking for new ways to build ministry in the church. And we need to also work together. Sometimes we can't do every good idea at the same time, but we have to come up with a strategy to put things into practice. But I think the best training to be an elder is just to be a Christian. And I think, just loving and serving is what's going to lead to recognition as elders and a quality of life that matches the things that we see in Scripture. It's a noble ambition for any man, for sure.
This was a thing I remember for me having been part of the Boston Church when I was, it's like, it's been like 1999, that was not the narrative.
Right.
So having been a member of a church of problems, I had no idea.
Right.
And that scared me, and it's fascinating that these statistics, and I know you said that membership isn't the only indicator of church health. I know we're not playing Moneyball here, but that the statistics to predict crisis income is intriguing to me, and I'm wondering, is this a tool we can be using now, or are we using now to try to figure out, are there changes we need to make it, what are those changes?
We are, I think, got to a healthy place where we're starting to be able to talk about statistics again. Because people just so you understand, leadership 15 years ago felt a great fear and pressure about statistics. I think it's very sad. I'm the kind of person, I believe, the more truth everybody knows, the better off we are. Like, the more we know, the better off we are. To hide anything is not, unless you're just guarding, let's write about somebody's individual life, personal life. There's a confidence that needs to be respected. But in general view of the church, we need to know where we are, where we're going, and how it's doing. And I think we're getting to a much healthier place. And this is one of the good practices things. You'll find in the churches in our movement that are growing significantly right now, they all have good statistical practices. And the churches that aren't growing typically don't. They don't really, there are some people still afraid to even have a membership list. Well, I believe, I used to hand out the membership list. I led the church in Birmingham, England for 9 years. Every 3 months we handed out the membership list with no personal details, just what small group everybody was in, and asked everyone to pray for everybody in the church. And that's what we did. So it also served, though, to remind people, okay, this is how the church looks. Church is built up with these small groups, and we did Sunday church and then small groups on midweeks, but they're just all different models. We tried probably 3 different variants of that model through time. And we just need to find what's working for the best health of our group overall. But I do think we need transparency. We just need to be proper about how we're respecting. If someone's got a deep spiritual struggle and they're not a danger to other people, we need to guard confidence as we would if they're a danger to others, and there's a reason to be open about that. Great.
Thank you for putting this together. I really appreciate the time and energy and sharing and making that so that we love and learn from our past. Repeating the same mistakes that we made. And I think the one thing that stood out to me was just how they acknowledge the weakness within how scripted was possible or at least the goalposts were almost intentionally focus people on the positive rather than taking that energy and activity on behalf of the rest. It just struck me as well. In writing and then all of a sudden we just put over, we were just keep marching forward. And it's almost like a fanatical way of maturity, like we don't have to think we necessarily really embrace this right now. And I feel like that just stood out to me. Just looking at
Yeah, I think since it's a noble goal to evangelize the world, I mean, who can speak against that? Okay, but at the end of the day, there's a way to evangelize the world that's right. I think the thing that I've learned most from 2003 is process. That you can have goals, but there needs to be good process. There needs to be discussion. There needs to be involvement. Good process is more important almost than outcome. Because good process results in good relationships. Whereas outcome, sometimes a little failure is what we need. God wants us to fail a little bit because whether it's a little bit of pride in us or actually this little character needs to get developed. Sadly, character doesn't develop when everything's going your way. We call that being spoiled. And so we need a little resistance training to be the people God wants us to be.
And on a side note, my husband and I became Christians on a failed issue. So I feel like God was familiar.
Absolutely. And in 2003, when things were really crazy in LA, there were still people getting baptized, and we were having all these, some of the reasons we're having these open forums, which are not pleasant. But people were standing there going, man, you guys are real. This is real Christianity. And you're like, really? I think what happened, I had this brother tell me, he goes, Andy, are we still the New Testament church? And I said, yeah, bro, but we thought we were Philippians, and it turns out we're 1 Corinthians. So, I'm still in the New Testament somewhere. Just got to get back to Philippians again.
And I too want to thank you for learning all this. I was a big Christian when the Secret Creed letter came out, and These are throughout my world, you see my new face, like, everything that happens. But one of the things that even today, and I know that this is nobody's heart, I know that everybody's thinking about, when I hear these numbers, the thing that statistics do, my mind is just remembering that souls, these are people who maybe forever finished, or maybe, maybe souls is what I want to say.
Well, it's very important, and we have to also match that with all the people who never even had a chance to hear, the list of the people we walk by, the people that don't know that we have a faith, it's pretty long too. But I do think we got to do our best to be positive. And at the end of the day, statistics are only effective when they come down to names. It's a membership list. To me, that's the key statistical data is a membership list that's got people on it. That's the most important level of stat taking is people. And but you can't talk. If I was to name the hundreds of thousands of people here, of course, that would just be the exercise.
And I recognize that that's not what you're doing. It's just, I think the enormity of it, really hit me when I saw, I knew about the number in 2003,
Oh yes, I agree with you. I mean, it should be, but I will only say that there will always be people that leave. So that way, there's no perfect statistic. Jesus chose 12 and one was a devil, his own words. And the other guys didn't even know it. So, I just think we have to take that to heart. And, I would say this, follow up with people that you know. Like, don't just look at that and be overwhelmed by a number, because that's not what you want to do either. You want to look at that and say, I know somebody in that category, and I can actually do something about that. Reach out. It may be just